I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing ourselves and our organization because we want to get to the, fun stuff of this program. But I'm Anne. I'm here with Dan. We're from the Watershed Project, which is a small nonprofit based in Richmond, California. And we do a whole lot of different types of things, including K-12 education. Then I will just go ahead and put a link to our website in the chat if anyone else is curious about what all we do. If you could go to the next slide. So here is our plan for today. We're going to essentially just walk through a program that we have taught. We've been teaching it virtually all year this year, and we've taught kind of bits and pieces of it in person as well. So it's sort of written to be adaptable for whatever your teaching situation these days is, which we all know is changing very quickly. And, depending on when you decide to use this program, it should be pretty flexible for you. So we'll spend, some time kind of with introductions and closing at the end. Hopefully we'll be able to leave a couple minutes for questions afterward too, but our email is scattered all over the place on here. If you have any questions or anything comes up for you after today, it's going to be kind of a lot of information thrown at you. So feel free to just reach out to us. So I'm going to go ahead and share the link for the program in the chat. Feel free, if you want to have it open as we're going through it today, you're more than welcome to. If, like me, you find it a little distracting to be trying to multitask with like slides and people on Zoom and also looking at something else in Google Drive, feel free to just skip it and we will talk through everything today on the slides together, and you'll have plenty of time to go take a look at the folders and the resources afterward and ask us any questions you may have. So let's go ahead and stop screen sharing for just a sec so that we can all get to know each other a little bit. And so what we're going to do is an activity that we like to do with students when we're first getting to know them. Of course, if this is your classroom and your students for the year, by the time you do this unit, you might not have to learn their names anymore, but it does sort of illustrate a point that we want to make. So what we're going to do is each share our names and something we're good at, one of our strengths. And as you're sharing your strength, you want to give a motion to go along with it. And I know if folks don't have audio or camera that works, then either you can describe a motion or you can just kind of come up with something that you're good at and we'll come up with a motion to follow it. So for example, my name is Anne and something I'm good at is playing piano. And then so if I could have everybody join me in the motion of playing piano. All right, and I'm just going to go down our participants list and put folks on the spot a little bit. So it looks like Corinne, you're up.
Great, I'm Corinne Brown, and something that I'm good at, attention to detail, which I'm not sure what the motion would be for doing that.
Yeah, I think of maybe like a focus.
Oh, there you go. Focus would be a good one. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. All right, Dan.
Hi, my name is Dan, and something that I'm good at is cooking, and I'm just gonna do chop, 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 chop. That's not how I actually chop, but really loosey-goosey like this.
Cool. All right, Ariel or Ariel, please correct me if I mispronounce your names.
Hi, thanks, Ariel. But let's see, I am good at, and it's because it's something I like, let's say hiking. I'm a great hiker.
Cool, thanks, Ariel.
Good momentum.
All right, Catherine.
Sorry, my camera's busted. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Something I'm really good at is puzzles.
Cool. Ooh. Puzzles.
Like math puzzles or language arts puzzles. I love. I have to do them every day. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Thanks, Catherine. Irene. And I'm not sure, we can't hear you. You're on mute. It looks like you're doing a really cool motion.
I'm so sorry. Something I'm good at is singing, using karaoke. I think that would be the best one for me.
Karaoke.
Yes, like that.
Oh, I miss karaoke.
Nice. All right, Monica.
Hi there. So I'm Monica in the Bay Area, also close to Anne, I think. And let me see if I can get this going here too. So nice to see everybody here. I was going to say something related to teachers since we're all teachers, but since this is actually for kids, maybe, right? That's how you're gearing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think of something that I'm good at as a kid. So, I still like to do hopscotch. How about that? And jumping rope and some of those things. So, and I'm not going to do it right now, but anyway.
Well, I am. I'm going to do a little hop.
Okay, hop. There we go. Okay, see? Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I would say something I'm good at is communicating. So I'm going to look like I'm talking.
Nice. It's a good one. Thanks, Sophie. Did I miss anybody? Don't think so. Cool. So that's a little activity that we like to use to start out this program often, because our first lesson kind of dives into the idea of biodiversity in an ecosystem. So what I like to point out is that all of us, on this call today, or maybe all of us in a classroom, if we were doing this with students, we all have a diversity of strengths, right? We're all good at different sorts of things. And as individuals, we're probably not going to be good at every single thing. For example, I would be terrible at karaoke, but then maybe I could lean on Irene for support, or so we can kind of use our different strengths to support each other. And it's sort of the same idea with biodiversity in an ecosystem. So I think we can go ahead and head back into the slides now. So for the next little bit, we're just going to be, walking through what's in each of these lessons. And I guess just as Dan's pulling it up, a quick word about what's in the Google Drive. So there is an overview materials folder that has some, background information and instructions about the program. It also has a list of any materials that you might need. Oh, yeah, it looks like we're seeing several windows here.
Okay, all my windows are showing?
Yeah.
Okay. Stop share.
Yeah, we can retry it.
I'm gonna exit out of presenter view. And then.
But yeah, just to, I guess, continue to talk through kind of what's in each of these folders. So there's some overview materials, including surveys in case you want to use those as, like a learning assessment for your students. All these materials in this drive, by the way, should be in view-only permissions, but feel free to make copies of anything that you want to edit and adapt for your own uses. Cool, thanks.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'll try to point out a few of the resources that are in that drive as we walk through each of these lessons. So let's start with lesson 1. Next slide. So like I said, lesson 1 is really just kind of an introduction to interdependence and biodiversity in ecosystems. So before the lesson, that's one of the other things that you'll find in the drive is there's a student homework assignments folder. And in there, the first homework assignment would be before lesson 1, and then they sort of alternate in between lessons for the rest of the program, just ending with the post survey after the last lesson. So in that first homework assignment, we'll ask students to take the pre-survey if you want them to do that, and to watch a couple of videos about ecosystems and about biodiversity in ecosystems, just to provide some foundational knowledge. So the guiding question for this lesson is, why is biodiversity important in an ecosystem? And so these guiding questions, which you'll see throughout the program, students are not expected to be able to answer these until the end of the lesson. So they'll be kind of working toward answering that question throughout the lesson. So again, they'll have done this homework assignment before the lesson in theory, and we start out with a little class mindset in each of our lessons. We like to open and close the class, with this mindset. You might have your own system for how you do this, however your teaching style is, but we like to use I am curious, I am compassionate, and I am connected as sort of a physical reminder for students. And then students would go through the same kind of introductions activity that we all just went through as a group, with sort of the same discussion about, our diversity of strengths as a class and how that compares to diversity in an ecosystem. And then this is where you start to get into reviewing some of the information from those videos and just making sure that students start to understand the concepts of interdependence and biodiversity. And a way to really solidify that is in the biodiversity game. So in the bottom right corner of the slide, you can see there's a little very crude ecosystem diagram with some relationships between different parts of an ecosystem. And essentially how this game works, there's, more detailed instructions for it in the lesson plan, but essentially students will, pick what part of this ecosystem they want to be. So I might say, okay, I'm going to be water, and I would write that down on my paper. And students all do this without knowing what anybody else is picking. And then there's sort of a random process where you as the teacher roll a die and see which part of the ecosystem is impacted. And students have to kind of sit out a turn and come back depending on which number the die lands on. And they start to see how, these relationships, for example, the trout needs really, it's funny that you mentioned trout, Corinne, actually earlier. The trout needs, clean, healthy water, right, to live and to provide a good habitat for it. So if something happens with the water, if the water gets impacted or polluted, or if the temperature is too high, it's no longer a suitable habitat for the trout, then students will start to see how those relationships kind of fall apart. So it's worth taking some, it'll probably take a few tries to really, get students into this game. And just full transparency, we haven't had a chance to try it out ourselves in a virtual setting. So if anybody does have a chance to try this with your students, we'd be really curious to hear your feedback and hear how it goes. But that's, intended to just really drive students toward answering that question: why is biodiversity important in an ecosystem? And they should hopefully have some idea of how to answer that after that activity, because after they go through it with, this ecosystem here, they look at a less biodiverse ecosystem. So there's only trout and water in that ecosystem, none of these other organisms. And then they can see how that ecosystem is kind of less resilient to impacts. So after wrapping that up, we introduced nature journaling in this lesson. So we have been huge fans of the nature journal, particularly, we always have been, but I think it's been an especially helpful tool during shelter in place and during the pandemic. And it was sort of our way of encouraging students to get outside into their nearby ecosystems near their home, whether that's a very urban environment and the wildlife they're seeing is, ants on the sidewalk, or, weeds growing out of a crack in the street, or maybe a street tree, or whether it's somewhere more rural, or different types of ecosystems. These activities should work in any environment that's around them. And it's just encouraging students to spend some time outside, away from the screens that we all, are on so much these days, and kind of observe what's around them. And that kind of leads into the following homework assignment. So between this lesson and the next one, students will be asked to observe, outside somewhere safe, using two different senses, sight, so a BioBlitz, where students are just going to be asked to pick a little sample area. So maybe a couple blocks on their street, or maybe it's their yard or what have you, or a little part of a park, and try to write and draw and document as many different organisms as they can during a 20-minute time period. And then sound mapping, where students are sitting in one place, listening with their eyes closed and writing or drawing symbols for all of the sounds that they're hearing around them and what direction that sound is coming from. So that's just a really quick overview into those couple of activities.
Nice. Thanks, Anne. And so moving on to lesson 2, what's in my ecosystem? The guiding question for this lesson is, how am I a part of my local ecosystem? And just a quick reminder, the homework that Anne was just talking about, the BioBlitz and sound mapping activity, we'll have some time, in the beginning after we set our class mindset to share takeaways from the activity. And on the right, there's a kind of a blurry picture of a sound map that a student did actually over a year ago now. And so you can just kind of see what it looks like. And I don't know how well it transfers on your end, but thought I'd share. And so after you kind of debrief the homework, the first activity is to create an ecosystem. And before we get into sharing how students will do this, we ask students, or remind students that people have been part of, our shared ecosystem and our shared watersheds for thousands of years. And that kind of leads into a land acknowledgement. And in all of our curriculum and in all of our programming, we incorporate land acknowledgements because we think it's important as we talk about land stewardship and building relationships with our watershed that we acknowledge the first stewards of this place, and really make sure that students know who they are and that they're still here today. So we have a little discussion about that, and there's a resource that we have in the lesson plan for you that, because we say that we're on Ohlone ancestral territory, and we live in Huchun, and the area of land, or the language that the Ohlone people speak is Chochenyo, and that's obviously going to be different depending on where you are. So we have a resource to help you navigate languages and names and stuff like that.
And I'll just point out that the lesson, all of the curriculum is pretty Bay Area specific. So it is a Bay Area specific resource. But if you're located somewhere else, then I'll share a link in the chat too that's a bit more national.
Cool, yeah. So then for the main activity, they'll need a piece of paper and a writing utensil and colors if they want to get colorful. And basically we have a set of cards, and they're Pokemon cards, but they have they're a set of resources, and basically they're just Pokemon to make it a little bit more fun. But so they use this set of resources to create their own ecosystem. So I have an example. This is a coyote brush, and in all of these cards, or most of these cards, there is some local indigenous uses of some of these resources. So we don't talk about traditional ecological knowledge, but that's kind of our intent, is to kind of bring some of that out in this lesson. And so they'll have the set of these cards, and then they'll draw in the resources that they want in their ecosystem. So they'll also have to draw in arrows and make connections between different things. So we want to make sure that students are, you know, making connections between, you know, showing how the biodiversity of place is beneficial. And they also need to include themselves in the drawing. So, you know, what are they benefiting from these resources? And then also, what are they giving back to help support the thing that they're using? So we're really focusing in on reciprocity and balance in an ecosystem. And we kind of intended this to be, you know, think back before all of this urban, you know, all of urbanization happened, and kind of, you know, just use the resources from the cards. And then the debrief discussion is like, okay, well, this isn't actually, you know, what our ecosystems look like. We have streets, we have cars, we have lots of other things, you know. How are we still a part of our urban ecosystem? How can we bring our ecosystem that we just drew to life? And so we have a list of discussion questions. And also we reiterate the guiding question of the day. And then we just kind of wrap up with a quick gratitude exercise. 3 things about yourself you're thankful for, 3 people you're thankful for, and 3 things about your ecosystem you're thankful for. And share out if time permits. And then introduce the next homework assignment. And the first one is a storm drain scavenger hunt. So you'll have students go outside and find storm drains in the neighborhood and kind of observe what's around them. Is there trash? Are there natural growing things? Are there creatures? Abiotic, biotic, and cultural items is how we say it in the lesson. And then we also have a watershed model video. So this is a video that we made, and we have an actual watershed model with water flowing through it. And if they don't know what a storm drain is, they will after watching the watershed model, because that really depicts, you know, how water moves through a watershed, all the different channels water can take, natural and, you know, engineered, like storm drains, and what are the impacts of water flowing through an urban place? You know, how can we impact water in the bay? Okay, and then lesson 3, people, water, and ecosystems. The guiding question for lesson 3 is, how is our ecosystem on land, our terrestrial ecosystem, connected to bay and ocean ecosystems? And so you'll start off with your class mindset, and then you'll do an activity called Watershed in Your Hand, and you'll have a scrap piece of paper. I don't know, if you want to look at me, I have one. And you instruct students to just crumple up the piece of paper, and then you'll kind of notice that you've made a little landscape. And so students will kind of, you know, discuss what are the high points, the mountaintops, what are the low points, the valleys, and then we'll use markers to draw in where water would flow, connecting the high points and low points, and then draw in human activity, so making sure that students are including themselves in their watershed map. And then you would spray the map with a spray bottle to make it rain, and make observations and see what happens to the colors after it rains on the watershed. And basically the water picks up and carries the color, and the areas where you draw in human activity, they kind of bleed in. And so just like in real life, water can pick up and carry things from our homes and from our communities, and carry them to where water flows in pools. And it kind of reiterates what the watershed model homework talks about, but nice to have a tangible activity. And then we move into kind of a more detailed and formal watershed mapping activity. And basically you project some slides of different maps. So the first map is kind of a aerial shot of the bay, and you just have students observe and discuss it. What are they noticing? Can they, where's the bay? Where's the ocean? And then there's a kind of a zoomed in Google map screenshot, or however you want to take it, of where your school is. And so then again, you have students make observations. What are they noticing? Can they find their school? And then we have some worksheets to go along with this next part. And we, when we've done this, we project a watershed map, and we have shared a resource on how to get this map so that your school is, present on this watershed map. But we delivered kits with maps in them so students can really see, the details of this map. And basically, we just have a discussion, and students learn what a watershed map is, and they use the key on the other side to find out where the creeks are in their watershed. Are there creeks? Engineered channels, so where are the storm drains? And basically, ultimately getting to the fact that all of the water in the Bay Area watershed eventually flows into the bay. And so we have a lot of we impact our watershed, we need to protect our watershed and keep our water clean. And then well, how does the bay impact us? Why do we care about this? What's so important to how come it's so important to keep the bay and ocean clean? So then we really want to make sure we have a discussion about why the ocean matters. So we have a little video in the lesson, and so we kind of debrief about the video and introduce homework number 4, which is a stormwater scavenger hunt. And basically that is students going outside and observing the different types of ways water could flow in their neighborhood. So what are they noticing any storm drains, or are they noticing any gardens or other types of infrastructure that impacts how water flows? Okay, any questions? I feel like I'm talking really fast. Okay, so this one's a fun lesson. Gray and green watersheds. Guiding question: how can cities restore the relationship between water, people, and ecosystems through the built environment? So, we talk a lot about, the negative impacts of urbanization and, and stuff like that. And so then we get to kind of bring up, well, there are really cool things that we can do in our urban environments that help get us back to those natural cycles and bring us back to that connection to nature, and among many other things. And we discuss a lot of them. So again, we'll start out with the mindset, and then kind of, since this is another packed lesson, we kind of get into the activities. So we'll share a couple of slides that introduce green and gray infrastructure. And basically there's side by side one city image that is like has no or very little green infrastructure, and then another city image that has a lot of green infrastructure, trees and parks and rooftop gardens. And then there's a set of discussion questions, you know, which city would you like to live in? Like, when it rains on both of these cities, where would the rain go? And it gets them discussing the differences, and kind of understanding the benefits of green infrastructure themselves without a lot of us telling them before. And then we define these two things, green and gray. And then we get to do some testing. So this is cool because we've made a couple of videos on how to make these models. So you can see my cursor, right? Okay. So there's a gray infrastructure model here, and then a green infrastructure model here. And basically, we have students pour polluted water into the gray infrastructure model and measure how much comes out, and then have a discussion about it. And then we'll have everyone do the same thing with the green infrastructure model, pour the polluted water in, and make note of the different colored, how just observe the differences between the outcomes, which is basically a different coloration and different amounts of water coming out. And so basically that means, we have all of this polluted water going into the bay, and we have less polluted water and cleaner water going into the bay with more green infrastructure.
And I will just really quickly jump in and say too, that if you have, if your students are maybe a little older or just really into data, or maybe I saw that we had somebody who teaches math, like we also have some real world data about how our bioswale we have a bioswale that's next to a parking lot at a community center, and it's right next to a creek. So it filters all the runoff that goes into the creek. So we have some real world data about, how that bioswale really lessens the amount of different types of pollutants that go into the bay. So feel free to reach out if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, and this is a bioswale model. In a bioswale, I'm not sure if everyone knows what a bioswale is, but it's a kind of divot that's usually next to a parking lot where, or next to a, big cement space. And so when it rains, it doesn't just go into the storm drain, it gets kind of filtered out, and there's a storm drain in the bioswale, but the water gets filtered out before it goes into the storm drain. And so I guess it's cool to bring up, the technical term for this so that students kind of can get excited about real world green infrastructure and, know that this isn't just some grass in, or that this doesn't represent, nothing.
Yeah.
And
Good catch.
And there are like layers that we have students observe. So there's a worksheet where students can kind of like draw in the layers of the bioswale. There's sand and pebbles and a filter and so on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a video on how to create that model?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that'll be in the overview materials folder in the Google Drive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then you'll introduce homework number 5, which is a stationary pollinator count. So again, we'll have students go outside and, hang out there for at least 10 minutes and just observe and, they'll find one flower, and observe how many pollinators come to visit it within a 10-minute period. And depending on what season it is, it might be a little bit tricky for students to find flowers. And so I can't remember. Anne, do you remember
there are some, species that bloom all year round in California, like California buckwheat is one that comes to mind. So usually most times of year, but it depends on what type of green space students have around them. So, hopefully they'll be able to find something that works, or you'll be able to find something that works as a class. And if not, then, you might choose to skip the activity, or students can just say, I didn't find any pollinators, because sometimes, that data is also important in terms of findings as well. And this protocol, by the way, the stationary pollinator count, is something that was adapted from the sunflower project. So, there's also like a database online where if you really wanted to make this kind of a project or a protocol for your students, they could go online and enter the data there, but absolutely not required.
Cool. All right, I'll move on to lesson 5.
Yeah, any other questions, by the way, before I dive into this one? Cool. Well, thanks for jumping in as needed. And by the way, highly encouraged to have your students build their own models for that last lesson too. It's probably, a good way to spread it out. All right, so lesson 5, restoring urban ecosystems. So this guiding question is the same one as lesson 4. If you hadn't noticed, we just sort of split it up into 2 different topics. So lesson 4 is really all about the stormwater benefits to urban ecosystem restoration and green infrastructure, and then lesson 5 is a little bit more about the benefits of pollinators and kind of getting back to our biodiversity theme in the beginning of the program. So in this lesson, they'll review the stationary pollinator count. There's also a cool video about pollinators linked at the beginning of the lesson, just again, so students understand the connection between pollinators and people. What benefits do we receive from pollinators? Why should we care? And then review, if students were able to see any pollinators or what types they saw. And then we sort of start to focus in on native bees. So, we just thought native bees are a really cool kind of case study to focus in on for this lesson. And so there's a series of slides on there that is a guessing game just about fun facts about native bees, how many species there are in California, how many, how they're much more efficient pollinators than our honeybees are in terms of agriculture, where they live. And so students will just kind of guess what their answer is. And depending on, what your classroom setting is, you might choose to have students kind of guessing in the chat and then you reveal what the answer is. You might choose to have students using sign language and then reveal, or, my dream when we're back to all teaching in person is that you could use this as a 4 corners game. So all the questions are multiple choice, A, B, C, or D. So if you just make one corner of the room, A, B, C, or D, students could actually go stand in whichever corner they think the answer is. So lots of ways you can adapt all of this curriculum, which I'm sure you're all brilliant at already. And yeah, so that last question about where do native bees live in California? So the slides will sort of walk students through the fact that most of our native bees in California are actually ground nesting. So about 70% live in burrows in the ground. And native bees, by the way, are more solitary than colony bees. So the vast majority of them kind of live in their little solitary homes. About the other 30% are cavity nesting. So on this bottom right-hand corner, those show kind of the types of homes for cavity nesting bees. And I think there's less than 1% that actually live in hives like honeybees do. And so there's an action project at the end of this lesson where students can build a bee box. And again, there's lots of different ways you could potentially do this with your students. And there's a materials list that's in the overview materials folder in the drive that, like I said, is all the materials you would need and where to find them. So in that document, there's a couple options if you wanted to just buy a bee box online. I know at least one teacher who's done that. That's pretty easy to do. What we've been doing is taking untreated, so preservative-free wood, because it really has to be, pesticide-free to be a home for a bee, and drilling a bunch of holes into it. So kind of coming out with something like this bottom right-hand corner image. You could also just take a bundle of maybe reeds or bamboo and kind of bundle it together for students. And just create a little like nesting box for these cavity nesting bees. And so we encourage you to have students maybe take part in building them, maybe take part in decorating them. So what we've been asking students to do in our classes is go outside and find some objects in nature near where they live. So it could be little pebbles, it could be sticks or fallen leaves. We encourage students not to pick things from living plants or animals, but finding some found objects and just sort of gluing them onto the box. If you are using wooden boxes, acrylic paint or other materials like that also work really well for craft type things. So really up to you how you want to have them kind of make and decorate these. And then hopefully they put them outside either at school or somewhere near home and provide a little home for their bees. And then finally, our closing activity for the program, we like to do a one-word whip around, which I know is probably a popular closing activity for a lot of folks. So for our students, we'll ask them to share one word to describe a takeaway that they learned from the program. Or it might be one word to describe what they thought of our time together. And we will also close out the same way. And then, yeah, after this lesson, the only, last homework is the post survey. Again, if you're doing that to assess student learning, then feel free to do that. Cool, Monica. That's awesome to hear that you've done bee boxes before.
Yes, and we're on the same page, they say, with you as well. So it's very I'm very glad to hear you talking about these things. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. All right. Well, I think we can take a moment here and just pause for questions. Any other questions or comments that folks might have about the program? Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question then, Anne or Jen?
Go for it.
So you've mentioned a couple of videos, and it sounds like you've done the videos yourself. Are those the videos that then might be on YouTube that we could, and would we have permission then to use them?
Yes, absolutely. So the Watershed Project has a YouTube channel, which I linked one video from it in the chat, but I'll just go ahead and drop a link to our general YouTube channel as well. And what actually might be even better than that is we have a home education playlist. So kind of right as the pandemic was getting started, there just seemed to be a lot of demand for teaching materials for virtual learning. So we put together a few different videos that, any of them you're welcome to use, and any relevant ones we've also linked in the lesson plans and materials for this curriculum.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. It's very creative.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Yeah. You're also sweet.
Monica, did you ever get into the shared resources? She had private messaged me that she couldn't get into lesson 2.
I'm going to try again.
Okay.
But then I got caught up with our conversation here, so I will. Thank you. Thank you very much for checking. I'm going to still let you know if I can't, because
Yeah,
I do look forward to trying to use the resources. So thank you. I'll check back.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and put our email in the chat here as well. And I know Corinne is planning on sending the slide deck out as well after this session, and our contact information, our website and email are on that. So yeah, definitely feel free. Like, there might be some broken links or bugs, you know, that often happens when you're putting together Google things. So please let us know if that's the case, and we'll go try to troubleshoot it.
yeah, I was able to get on into them, so it might be, I don't know if it's a district computer that might have restrictions or something. But I also copied all the links of all the other resources you put in, so I'll put that in the email you guys get next week.
Awesome.
Well, if there aren't other questions for now, feel free to stick around if you do have any after we close out. But I would like to do our own one-word whip around quickly to close out our time together. So if you could just share one word to describe what you're most interested or eager to try from this program.
I like the flow of the activities, you know, from the mindset all the way to the last part of, you know, getting into this different activities we're in. Students will be motivated to create their own model.
Yeah, I love the model of the watershed in the hand with the piece of paper. That's just nice and simple, and you can do anywhere.
Yeah, I'm seeing bees in the chat. Nice. Yeah, and feel free to jump in and unmute or share in the chat if you haven't shared yet.
Nice.
Model.
That's definitely a highlight when I teach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a bit of an investment of, you know, time to put those together and wait for some grass to grow, but it's really worth it in terms of student engagement is what we've seen.
Yes, plan ahead. You might, some seeds in grass take longer to grow than others, we've realized.
The hard way. Yes.
The hard way.
Thank you, Irene, for joining us. And yeah, feel free if other folks on the scavenger hunt. Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, the map is really, you know, I love these maps. I hadn't seen them before I started working at the Watershed Project, but I like that it highlights not only sort of the visible, you know, creeks and where water goes that you can see it, but there's also this whole underground network, right, of like storm drains and storm water, you know, pipes, and the map is really good at illustrating that. So even if you're in this completely paved over urban environment, you know, it kind of highlights this underground watershed network, which I think is cool.
Are those the ones from the Oakland Museum or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great maps.
Questions before we wrap up here? Well, thanks again, folks, for taking time to hang out with us this afternoon. And we really appreciate your, you know, all your kind comments and involvement with the training. So
yeah,
let us know how it goes if you try it out.
Thanks, everyone.